Today I want to present how we can leverage AI and Retrieval-Augmented Generation, RAG for short, in DPDK. What is the motivation? I'll just explain about the motivation, what is the problem statement, what is the suggested solution, what is basically RAG. I'll give some examples, how we can integrate it into DPDK. I'll try to answer the question, why now to do it? And I'll show a bit of the challenges that basically we'll be facing. About me, it's less interesting. And let's start with how can we leverage AI in DPDK. AI in DPDK can be leveraged in many ways, from automated code reviews. When I said automated, it's not really automatic that you will approve the patch. That's not the idea. The idea is that it can save the iterations and give the user information that this reviewer probably wants to see this one, is looking for something. We have the CI tools that are basically doing the functional stuff but we want the logical stuff. Did you describe right the patch? Did you explain yourself? So something more humanly, if you can call it. We can have unit integration test generation, code improvement and refactoring. This is mainly if you are working inside an IDE. Best practices detection. We can detect if common practices are being employed. Document generation, that's important. And the one thing that I want to focus today is we can help DPDK application developers, which I think all of those things are valid and good, but in this specific presentation, I'm going to focus on how we can help DPDK application developers. Why I'm focusing on this? Again, when we implement most of the logic, it's true for all use cases. The only thing that is then is different. But from my experience currently, I think that when we're application developer basically are our customers. And each one of them is building his own applications, router, security, load balancer, whatever. And from his point of view, it's his application, that's what he wants. And he knows he needs to integrate DPDK because he needs to get the best performance, and we supply the best performance. But now the question is, when it's trying to implement it, it's hard for him. It encounters some difficulties. For example, DPDK in basic is complex, and by definition, it's also powerful. It's powerful and complex. So how do you do stuff? The learning curve is steep. There are releases. We are a live community. Each time we introduce new features, sometimes we deprecate features. There are numbers of ways to implement anything, especially, for example, RTE flow. Each company has its own way of doing things, best practices. So how can a simple developer know what is the best practices? And in general, the general AI tools available today are not good enough for our test case. They will be good if we give them the right data. We'll talk about it later. So basically, it also results in that the user has a difficult onboarding and bad user experience, which I'm trying to solve. Sorry. What is the solution? Basically, create our own DPDK AI using RAG. This AI can be used for discovering feature, explaining about feature, giving design guidelines on how to implement stuff, best practices. It can give version control suggestion, and so on. Okay, a few words on what is Retrieval-Augmented Generation, RAG for short. Basically, it's an AI technique that enhances large language models by enabling them to retrieve and integrate external up-to-date information when generating responses. In other words, basically, it means that we can take the large language model, the LLM, and add it our own data, up-to-date data, that's important. Basically, this approach fixes two main issues of LLMs, the cutoff date, which basically each LLM has its own cutoff date, usually a few years before it's really developed in the field. And from this day on, it doesn't learn anything new, it's just training. So if we did anything in the last few releases, it's not going to be shown in the AI, in the LLM. Second of all, it's the focus issues. Basically, when the LLM is trained on the most massive amount of data that it can collect. And as much as we are an open community and we have a lot of projects, it's a small drop in the sea. So the model was not trained much on our data, and that limits his responses and the way he thinks. Basically, by adding our own data, we can, first of all, solve the two issues by giving it up-to-date data that it didn't have, and secondly, focus his answers to our data and leverage the fact that he knows how to read documents, but on our documents. Let's see how it works. Originally, we have the user, which connects directly to the LLM. He asks the user, the LLM, a question, the LLM answers. Then, what happens is, now we're introducing a new entity that is called the retriever. The retriever now gets the query from the user. It searches in its own database for the relevant information, and then it sends the original query with the external information, and sometimes with external instructions on how to respond. Then this retriever gets the answer from the LLM. Now this loop can have a number of iterations to fine-tune the answers to get even more correct information, and only then the user gets the response, which is correct and up-to-date with all sanity and no hallucination, hopefully. Let's look at a few use cases, API changes. Basically, by the way, for the record, I used OpenAI 4.1 in my testing, but just for the record. So I asked the API, the LLM, to run the command to run application on a specific device, and I got the left side. Basically, as we can see, there are two main issues. First of all, is using -W. We didn't use -W for over 5 years, I think. I looked in the code to find out who changed it. It's like 5 years ago. But I guess that most of the examples on the web are older than 5 years, so you got -W. Second of all, we see that he did put the device as an argument to the application and not to the EL. Again, incorrect. By adding it, the information that I copied from EL args include, simply copied it, pasted this information, I got the right result. Let's look at something a bit more complex. Best practices. I took for this example IPsec. I'm not an expert in IPsec. I took it just for the example for this presentation. The basic logic is you receive a packet, you pre-process it, decrypt it, post-processing, and send it to the wire. Now, a user application developer can simply write this pipeline, but it will not really leverage the DPDK. So let's see what AI gave me as a result. Simply, it's maybe hard to read, but it just gave me general concept about project organ structure using Mason, how to initialize RTE in it. It's true, everything is correct, but it's the basic. It's not doesn't give me anything about my own IPsec applications. The only thing that might be relevant is that number 3 that he says, use IPsec library. That's it. And that's the end of it. And by the way, we can see that he recommends to use number of cores in the answer there, which is correct. So in this case, I gave him a bit more information. If you have time, I can show you exactly the information, but around 20 lines of text. Basically, and I told him that the best practice is basically to use multi-core, but in this example, I wanted to use not just multi-core, I wanted also to separate between the data, receiving the data and sending them, to the decryption. Since the decryption is slower, I didn't want to slow the system, so I told him that it's better to use that way. I also told him that to use the storing API introduced by Konstantin. Basically, it's a new API. We also heard about it yesterday. It's a great API, and if you look at the documentation, it's quite nice. Inside RT ring, it's described exactly how it works, very pretty. But if you look down, you see a small line that says, it might be used for IPsec. There is no real use case. There is no, why is it good and how? So user probably, sorry to say, Konstantin, will not find it unless he heard your lecture, and that's a shame. So now I'm saying it's good practice to use the storing. Okay? And of course, if possible, to use offloading. And now we're getting something much nicer, I think. First of all, we're getting a total section that's called application architecture. And it explained to us that how to use the multi-threaded approach. It's introduced the storing API that now people can look at and say, oh, it's interesting, why you recommended this to me. It explains the thread core assignment. It explains the packet flow, what it needs to do in each time. Then it explains that if you have the hardware that allows offloading, offload. Think about if it would be nice if we also give it the offloading supported by each company, then it can really give him if it's true or not. And later on, it's not showing, it shows basically what we saw before. So it's much more user-friendly. It gives the developer much more information to work with. Let's take a look at the last example for today. A test PMD, basically I asked him to create a test PMD that insert rules that matches source IP and destination IP with counter and send it to Q2 using the template API. He gave me this line as a result. The problem with template API, it's much faster by magnitude than standard API, standard RT flow API, but it requires much more work. So if the user tries to run this line, he will fail. And then he'll try again and understand. And basically, it will take him like 7 tries to make it work, because there is steps that needs to be done before adding this. So by copying the documentation from RT flow, RST, I just copied it. Again, it's important to understand, we have most of the documentation. It's just need to give it to him. Basically, we got the full correct answer, so we see that we need to configure. We need to create a template, the pattern template, the action template, the table, that insert the rule and pull for completion. Basically, as you can see, it's much more complex, and probably if the user just tried it, it will fail, and again, very bad user experience. So how can we add AI to DPDK? First of all, we need the RAG stack. Basically, it includes the LLM, the retriever, some vector DB, and chat UI. If you notice, the first 3 are shared from all user cases that we will want. This is the basic blocks, and it's always true. So those are true for all use cases. The only thing that changes is the chat UI that is more relevant for this specific use case. We need the technology, which is basically open source tools from FISys, that is vector comparison, IAstack in LangChain, which is basically frameworks that basically encapsulate everything I described about getting the response from the user, the request from the user, sending it to the database, sending it to the LLM. So it's an open frameworks that are doing this. The data. We can add the data that we need is basically docs, commit, examples, mailing list, archive, everything that we can think of, and we have already. And the last thing, again, specifically for this feature, the simple chatbot on dpdk.org. Sorry. Why do I think we need to do it now? First of all, our customers are using AI, at least most of them, and if they're not, they will. Either by using open direct access or using AI-powered IDEs, but they are using it, and when they're using it, they're getting bad results. It's even worse than just saying, I don't know, it's leading them the wrong way. So that's super bad user experience. Secondly, we need the RAG tools. The RAG tools are mature, LangChain, IAstack, it's a totally open frameworks, free, open sourced, so we don't need to invent the wheel at all. And most importantly, the LLMs are accessible, they're changing, they're evolving, and we just need to use them, to select the one that we're using. Nothing is coming without a price. So basically the price here is that we need to create data. For example, best practices we don't have, we need to create it. Sometimes in order to help the AI, we need to format our documentations a bit differently. But we can use the AI to do so, because we can say, this is the feature I did, and how can I write it better so you will understand? The AI will answer us. We need to build the general infrastructure. Either if we're using open source frameworks or not, we need to build it. The most painful thing is the continuous maintenance. First of all, we need to keep the vector DB up to date, and we need to keep leveraging and testing for newer models, how they are affecting our results, and if we need to change the prompts, how new data is changing our results. So we need to continue working with it. We cannot stop doing it and one shot, and that's it. Fourth, we have the hosting integration. The hosting and integration, basically, we need to host it, we need to integrate it in our DPDK site. And we have the cost, of course. LLM costs money, vector database costs money, so there is a money. But usually, LLMs, at least, which are the major cost factors, are paid by demand. So if nobody uses them, we will not pay. If somebody is using, we will pay, but that's good. Okay, so that's my final slide. So what I'm proposing. First of all, let's try to create a chatbot for AI, for DPDK. We can use actually now, during my research, we can also use MCPs that even developers that are using AI-powered editors can really ask the questions already from their inside editors and not need to go even to DPDK site. And that's without any extra cost. Of course, how can you help? Basically, I'm here to present and to push forward this idea. So first of all, you can download anything LLM or LM Studio and start to play. You can experience the RAG approach. You can test and support DPDK bot AI GitHub project that I've opened. Again, it's a simple one, but the advantages of the GitHub project is that unlike standard RAG, where we have vector database and we don't know what is inserted, in this case, we have full control on what you insert for the question, so you can learn what helps the AI, what it doesn't like, what it likes better, and then we can move forward. I didn't want to wrap up everything, so it will be black magic. And of course, you can advocate for this in the community and say, okay, we want to, it's not an easy work, and basically, I don't think I can do it alone. I don't have that much free time, unfortunately. And if you have any questions, want to support anything, you can reach me using the mailing list or at my mail. That's it. Thank you.